Welcome everyone to our session on best practices for cyber readiness, recovery, and rebuild. I'm Michael Fusillo, and I'm joined with my esteemed colleague, Matthew Erickson, and we both work at Commvault. And for those who don't know about Commvault, we're an advanced APN partner. You can see we have lots of other badges, and we've been delivering protection and cyber resiliency to AWS customers since 2008, when we first built S3 support. Now, when I mention cyber resiliency, to me, words really matter. So I wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page when we talk and when I talk about cyber resiliency. And for me, and for NIST, and hopefully for you, cyber resiliency is really the ability to anticipate, withstand, recover from, and adapt to adverse conditions and threats and things of that nature. And there's two things I really want to focus on in this definition. The word adapt. I think people really sleep on the adaption part of this, and they don't pay enough attention to it, and that has a lot of adverse effects. And then cyber resilience is a continuous process. It's a continuum. You're going to constantly be in this state. So it's really important to keep those things in mind as we kind of go through this. So just a quick agenda. I'll cover cyber resilience from a really high level, and then I'll pass it over to Matt. Matt will cover this stuff super deep and talk about the different air gaps that we have. He'll talk about Cleanroom recovery, which again will be a pretty common theme through most of the slideware today. He'll talk about dependency discovery and protection, AKA Cloud Rewind, and he'll pass it back to me. I'll talk about event-driven continuous backups, AKA Clumio. And then we'll wrap up, and there'll be plenty of time for Q&A after the fact. So if you could, save your questions, and we'll stay until all those questions are asked. So a little bit about me, Michael Fusillo. I'm the PM lead at Commvault for hyperscalers and security, and it's my passion and duty to constantly provide protection and security for cloud assets and applications. Over to you, Matt.
Matt Erickson. So I work with Mike, really just helping our customers be more cyber resilient from the region into local zones, right out to outposts and beyond. This is my fourth reInvent, so it doesn't get any easier. Thursday is always hard. We're over the hump now, and it's the party tonight. So let's get this going so that we can all get to the party.
Awesome, thanks. So I intentionally said about cloud assets and applications because I've been here a very long time, and free cigar to anyone who could tell me how long I've been here after we finish. And why I say that is because I've learned over the years that traditional backup and recovery is simply not enough in the cloud world. I think when we started to see cloud, it was kind of like somebody else's machines, and we have lots of jokes internally about that. But at the end of the day, people started building different. The elasticity and all these other things really came into question. So we realized that we had to do something different. So now what we do is we build for cyber resilience. And cyber resilience is not just fancy backups and snapshots and other things, right? It's really about continuous discovery of the things that are out there, right? Finding all the different silos, understanding the data, understanding the context of your applications, and providing, full protection, full security for all those particular assets. So now, of course, we have to talk about shared responsibility, but I think Commvault really plays a big role in security in the cloud. So over the last, 2 decades or so, we've released a lot of capabilities to make sure that your data is secured, and I would consider us a trusted data custodian. So what that means to us, Commvault, is really we provide encryption everywhere and for everything. And that's, at rest, it's over the wire, and it's even in use. And we continue to look at things like quantum, releasing our post-quantum cryptography. So there's a lot of different capabilities that we've provided into the product. Now, not just that. There's CIS level 1 hardened images sitting in Marketplace. There's multi-factor authentication. There's multi-person authorization. So at the end of the day, we take the security of the data ultra seriously. And that's all I really wanted to convey with this particular slide. So when I was talking about cyber resiliency and how it's a continuum, this kind of tries to outline that, even though it looks like a pretty linear path. And then again, I'll talk about adapt toward the end. But it all starts with really understanding your data. And if you look at the extreme left side and we're talking about sensitive data scanning and classification, you have to know where your data is, and you have to know the kind of data that's there, right? Super, super important. And why that's important is because when we want to make risk recommendations or even remediation to both live data or backed up data, it's super important for us to have that really high fidelity of that data. And then as we continue to the right side, we look at threat recommendations. We have our cyber deception product for, both modern and legacy workloads so that you can really provide good perimeter protection. And that gives us early warning. And for the folks that hopefully have been to a lot of the sessions this week, for all the security sessions I went to, there was one main theme that every single one had, and they talked about testing. Testing, testing, testing. And you're going to hear this 1,000 times, throughout this presentation today. But testing is ultra, ultra critical. And for us, when we talk to our customers, they told us, yeah, I know I need to test, but it's really, really hard. So that's why we had built Cleanroom Recovery, because it provides a simple and safe way for people to start testing their data. And that's not the only facet of it, but that's a really big way that we provided that particular simplification for our particular users. And then there's always the obvious, right? Something bad happens. So then you need all these different recovery modalities, because like I said before, traditional recovery may not be enough for your environment, especially if you have modern apps. So that's where Cloud Rewind and Rebuild and Clumio come in, and we have to do this at the cloud scale. We have to do it across your distributed applications. So it's really important for you to test these different modalities to see what works best for your workloads. So testing, again, super, super important. And then finally, we get to adapt. Throughout this life cycle, as you continue to go through it, you're going to continually learn new things. The new things that you learn have to be put back into the left side of this equation. Because if you don't do that, bad things are going to continue to happen again. And 60% of the users that we help with the second threat, this is what happens. They just didn't learn from the original instance. So super, super important that you have to adapt to these changes. And then obviously as new threats, enter our landscape, we need to continually be vigilant against them. Now, we've done this across a broad spectrum of folks. And I know there's a whole bunch of logos on this slide, and it's really trying to convey that no matter what services you have, no matter how big your company is, and no matter where your workloads may be, whether they be on-prem, whether they be in public cloud, gov cloud, local zones, wavelength zones, like all of these things, no matter where it is, we want to make sure that we're providing complete protection and security and cyber resilience across the broad spectrum of things. And let's not forget, there are some really vertical specific scenarios that we want to make sure that we equate for. So when we talk about public sector, gov cloud, all kinds of server-side encryption, there's all these capabilities that we build into the product to make sure that we have the utmost security for these particular vendors for their particular use cases, especially when we talk about government and quantum being a specific threat, super, super important. When we talk about financial services and healthcare, we think about, again, sensitive data discovery, understanding PII, patient data, those really important things. And then when we look at healthcare, even Epic or even MedTech, fully supported with our particular solution. So, customers can journey to the cloud and make sure that they are certainly protected completely. And then high tech, composable applications, containerized applications, making sure that we protect them in their existing state and being able to provide them with advanced recovery options like Cloud Rewind so that they can be put back or even moved somewhere else seamlessly and as they are as a complete unit. And how we do that? Well, it's powered by our broad and deep protection for all of your applications. So it's not just the services that you see here, it's the depth in which we do things that actually differentiates us from some of the other players in the space. So whether we're talking about compute or database or serverless, we have this really broad and deep spectrum of protection to keep everyone cyber resilient. And it's more than just those services too. Our deep integration into AWS organizations, our deep integration with Control Tower allows us to continuously discover net new things and provide that same protection, even if you have like multi-account landing zones and other things that add a lot of complexity to the scenarios. So I know I talked a lot about like what we do. So now it's let's shift gears to like how we've helped our mutual customers become more cyber resilient. So I'm sure everyone in the audience is familiar with Sony, but again, media and entertainment, they have a very clear vision statement about delivering Kando to the world, and there's about 9,000 employees that help deliver that to the world. And like many of our customers, they approach us with pretty simple problems, right? They have a lot of point solutions that's adding a lot of complexity and cost to the equation. They're rapidly going to the cloud, and they have some questions, and there's a mismatch of SLAs, and they're having a lot of problems with, understanding how I'm going to get workloads from on-prem into the cloud. And then, in Sony's particular case, they had a really deep concern about threats as they're journeying to the cloud, especially as some of the workloads were going to be replatformed and refactored. So here's a simplified example. I tried not to make it too complex so I can kind of walk through it, but Matt will be covering all the big technical pieces. But again, Commvault Cloud, we're protecting their on-premise state. We take a common SQL database, we replatform it into a multi-AZ DB cluster. We start using short-term snapshots, we vault them off to a long-term, and then they get to even use them for dev test scenarios. So again, this is a very simple process for us to do, and while we were protecting the on-premise state, we allowed the product to completely move their database to the cloud, and then we continue to protect it while it's in the cloud. So there's no exposure points for the customers, and we were able to really ease that burden off of them. And for us, it provided us with a 4x lower RPO for them. So they were super happy with that, because not only was the initial RPO a concern, but also as they grow, obviously things continue to grow at mass scale. So it was really important that we didn't just achieve, but we exceeded. We had a massive reduction in cost, especially with our technology for Amazon S3. So as we efficiently store their snapshots and the backups, they had a significant cost reduction. And then the big thing for them was really having a single pane of glass across their entire estate. So as we were protecting not just what was going on in Amazon, but also their on-premise estate and even some of their SaaS apps, they had a single solution to protect all of it and secure it, providing complete cyber resilience for them. And what would a reInvent 2024 session be without some Gen AI stuff? So I will breeze through this, but it's all jokes aside, like this is a really big deal, and I'm sure any of the sessions, whether they be keynotes or whatnot, Gen AI is a very big topic, and I think people are moving so fast that they're kind of forgetting that you need some cyber resilience, you need to have security, you need to have data protection. So as I'm sure we've all known, going from the bottom up, we have deep protection for EC2 and a lot of the infrastructure that already lives in Amazon. So for us, this is table stakes. We can protect your workloads as you're building these infrastructure for your Gen AI apps. Private data, kind of that data plane. We talked about our sensitive data discovery and classification and remediation. We could even provide redaction. But more importantly, because we have these deep relationships with the S3 team and the storage team, EFS, EBS, and wherever other storage tiers that they're using, full protection from the Commvault perspective. So infrastructure data is already protected for your Gen AI workloads. And as users continue to adapt to Amazon Bedrock, other AI models, and even maybe have training data somewhere else kind of outside of these particular data layers, we'll continue to evaluate and provide protection for that. So in a nutshell, as you guys are going through your journey with your Gen AI apps, just know that Commvault's already here with some cyber resilience for you. And with that, I will pass it over to Matt.
Okay. G'day, everyone. If my accent's a bit weird, Mike will translate. So I promise there's no more Gen AI. Nothing wrong with what Mike did, but there'll be no more Gen AI. So look, as I mentioned, this is my fourth reInvent. And I don't know who caught the keynote today, but I was pleasantly surprised to hear that, so they had Canva on stage, and they were talking about how they built a monolith and continued iterating and modernizing that all the way through to microservices. Whenever I leave this event, I leave worried that my apps are not modern enough, they're not containerized enough, they're not serverless enough. Don't worry. What you see today, you will walk away with tips and best practices to be more cyber resilient, regardless of where you are in that journey. So starting off, immutable virtual air gaps. So what is an air gap? So we started with computer networks, just computer on network A couldn't speak to computer on network B. They were physically separated. We then had air-gap backups. We literally took tapes out of the library, sent them off-site to prevent them from accidental or malicious deletion. We really wanted to get them away from the blast radius of that production application and the production site. But as we started taking a cloud-first approach to our apps, we really wanted to achieve those same protections that air-gaps gave us, but we needed our data to be much more accessible. If you've ever waited for a truck to come back on site, you know what I mean. So there are some really great modern approaches that both AWS and Commvault can deliver to you to get that same air-gap protection. Things like snapshot replication, cross-region, service-independent copies, data perimeters. For those of you that were in the session just before this with Becky Weiss, you'll know what I'm talking about. Immutability, so that you have accidental and malicious deletion protection. And Commvault has its own secret sauce here, which we'll get to a little later. So starting with snapshots. You should be using snapshots today. This is your great first recovery point for your application. It's an in-account snapshot. It's an in-account protection. And you can use it for things like EBS, RDS, Redshift, and many others. And there's kind of, I won't call it an air gap, but there is some separation here. You have a fully independent copy with your snapshots, and it's sitting typically in 11.9's durable S3. So you've got protection from any service issue in EBS, for example, which is great. We never had this on-prem with our enterprise storage arrays. But as we know, we want to get the snapshots or the backups away from the production account. So you should be replicating them out to a vault account, a data bunker, whatever your organization calls that. And ideally, if you're looking for regional level protection, then you should be replicating them cross-region. Now, as we know in today's day and age, everything is defense in depth. So as you move things out of the operational domain of the production account, you'll want to re-encrypt those snapshots so that you can add another layer of control around them to potentially prevent your production account from manipulating them, right? So, because this is your last line of defense, right? This is your backup. So the second sort of air gap, and this one's a little bit unique, that we hear from our more regulated customers is service-independent backups. So what does that mean? Well, in the heavily regulated industries like FSI, they want to back something up today and recover it back to the service in 7 years' time. But they want the protection to know that that recovery is going to succeed regardless of changes that AWS make to that service. So what we do here is you protect all of the data associated with that particular resource, but all of the metadata that allows you to rebuild. So this might be things like vCPUs and RAM counts. It might be file and folder permissions. It might be deep application understanding like schemas and tables and container manifests. So again, you collect all of that information, write it out to durable S3, and then replicate it. You'll see there's a very common theme on replication here, out to wherever you need that to be separated from your production site. We're actually seeing, again, a lot of our regulated customers looking to push this out back on-prem or to an off-cloud or alternate cloud location. I know in Australia, our banks definitely want to demonstrate to their regulator that they can back up to an alternate cloud and recover to that alternate cloud as a disaster type recovery. Now, you are going to need deep cloud, container, SaaS, and traditional application understanding to achieve service-independent backups. You can check out Commvault's list on that QR code. If there's something there that's missing, grab Mike and I after this presentation. We'd love to talk to you. So the final air gap that we're going to talk about is the network air gap, which I'm sure is the one that you all thought that I was going to be talking about initially. So in a network air gap, we have our production apps, and they're backing up to the primary backup copy. What you should be doing with this primary copy is wrapping it in a data perimeter. So a data perimeter is a series of security controls that are made up of service control policies, resource-based policies, VPC endpoint policies, and they really enforce that your data is only accessible by people in your organization, and your data can only traverse and live inside your organization. So it's not only preventing unintended access to your data, it's also preventing data exfiltration. Now, as we know, we're replicating, so we have a secondary copy here. You can call it a ransomware readiness copy, a compliance copy, and you'll notice that the perimeter here is slightly smaller. That's because we have overlaid additional fine-grained controls, identity and network controls, over the coarse-grained controls that we got from our original data perimeter. So now the number of principals and resources that can access and update that secondary copy is dramatically reduced. So where's the network air gap? Because there's almost a straight line through there. Well, you introduce some sort of interruption to the compute instances that provide access to that secondary copy. So Instance Scheduler on AWS can schedule those resources to come up and down. You place this outside of the administrative domain of your backup administrator normally, so that you've got some separation of duty. But we do actually have some customers powering this up and down manually, right? Because that copy is quite often their absolute last line of defense for ransomware. So they may only update it monthly, right? So it'll be inaccessible outside of that time period. So if that all felt like a little bit too much, I'm proud to announce that Air Gap Protect is now available in AWS. Air Gap Protect is the easy button for secure, immutable, isolated storage for your clean backups. So Air Gap Protect is built on Amazon S3, so you get that industry-leading performance, scalability, security, but most importantly, you get that 11 nines of data durability. So when you need to recover, your data is going to be there and accessible. Now, all data in Air Gap Protect is kept immutable to prevent against accidental and malicious deletion, which is absolutely a recommendation on almost every cybersecurity framework I've seen with respect to ransomware preparation. And your data is encrypted all the time, of course, using Amazon keys or your own. There is nothing for you to set up with Air Gap Protect. So there's no accounts, there's no roles, there's no credentials. Commvault handles all of that for you so that you can focus on innovating on behalf of your customers while staying protected. We like to think of this as an operational air gap because you get the benefit of rapid backup and recovery to an S3-powered storage location, but all of the operational burden of securing and isolating that from cyber attacks or bad actors is handed to Commvault. So on to our next best practice. So Mike was very clear about a common theme both at the show here and in the presentation, and that is testing. So now you have your data in a safe, secure location, you can start testing. So a show of hands here, who's actually testing recovery of their production applications regularly? Mike, tell me how many hands you see go up.
Not many at all.
Not many at all. Okay, so gold star for those that put their hand up. Because everyone didn't put their hand up, there's obviously going to be some value in discussing this. And look, this is, we called this testing recovery for game day. When it comes to game day, you want to knock it out of the park. When it comes to recovery day, you actually want that to almost be a boring event. You want to have done it so many times before that you know the outcome. And that's the goal of testing. So in the keynote today, they were talking about change is constant and building applications for evolvability, right? The fact that your applications are going to continue morphing and moving from that monolith that Canva was talking about all the way to microservices. Testing is going to make sure that you're protected and recoverable through that lifetime. So I'm happy to announce that Cleanroom Recovery is going to be available in our next release. It's so close, I'm going to show you a demo out of our labs today. And Cleanroom Recovery is really about strengthening your ransomware readiness, but almost your cyber recovery readiness. You really you raise the bar of cyber resilience across the organization. And you do that by performing repeated periodic recovery testing into a safe, secure, on-demand location. Now, the goal here is quite simple: reduce the mean time to recover. And that both means all of the, getting the bits on the wire, but all of those manual processes that you may or may not have written down. Our goal is to automate as much as possible for you so that you can focus on bringing your apps back up. And we do that into on-demand EC2 resources in our example today, and that keeps the cost low, right? Because you're only paying for the resources while you're using them, and Cleanroom will tear all of this down after the testing's done automatically. Both the resources you restore and some of the other resources, which we'll take a look. Now, me personally, when I was in ops myself, I used to go off-site once a year to test our DR plan. I couldn't afford to subscribe for all of our applications. So I had a subset of my apps, and I had 2 days to recover all of them. And I had a run book like this that I was preparing for like 6 months. And I tried to recover the critical applications. Anything that failed, I tried to remediate at the time. But if I ran out of time, I simply had to write that down, try and come up with an answer before I came back a whole 12 months from that test. If I had have had Cleanroom, I could have been continuously recovering and being able to confirm to the business that I could recover them in the time periods that they were looking for. Would have been absolutely game-changing. And I would have been able to afford to do my entire application landscape, not just a very small portion. So there is one other recovery which Mike was talking about as well, and that's that forensic recovery, the ability to understand what's happened in an environment when there's been a breach or some sort of suspicious activity, and that's where a forensic recovery comes into play. We're going to take a look at that too. Okay, so I'm not making this up. Whenever a vendor is up, you kind of, are they really being truthful here? The desire for Cleanroom recovery here came from watching our customers trying to comply with this requirement from the reliability pillar, and everyone was doing it differently. They were scripting it, they were writing manual run books. Some people could recover in hours, some people, it took days or weeks. So we really wanted to simplify that testing, and you'll notice that the testing there is talking about not only accessing the backups, but the processes. It's people and process. Do you have the run books that can recover your application end to end? Do you have the staff or the personnel to do it? And have they actually done it so that when game day arrives, they actually know which buttons to press? So I could list off different frameworks all day. I assure you they all recommend testing recovery of your backups, right? A backup's great, but an untested backup or a team that can't recover it doesn't deliver the business outcome. And our customers in the EU are now subject to DORA, or the Digital Operations Resilience Act, and it specifically mandates cybersecurity testing and a requirement to have evidence of that testing. So we obviously want to avoid that sort of a regulator eye of attention, so let's go and have a look at an end-to-end Cleanroom recovery. I forgot about this slide. So before you get to a recovery, you need a clean backup. Now, what does clean mean? It means malware-free, it means anomaly-free, and Commvault continuously scans both your live and backup data for malware and anomalies. We use AI and ML, so we try to stay ahead of all of the new emerging threats that perhaps don't yet have a name, and we prevent you from restoring those and reinfecting your environment, of course. But more recently, our heavily regulated customers, this was a little bit of finance, a little bit of healthcare, came to us saying that they're using our risk analysis product to identify PII or PHI sensitive data in their workloads, because they consider a recovery of sensitive data into an uncontrolled area just as bad as restoring malware or a malicious workload. So yeah, that was something we didn't anticipate, but something we were very happy to see, because not only is it demonstrating their thinking about it, but we gave them the capability to identify that risk before it became tomorrow's problem. So let's walk through an example now. So we're going to back up our application. We have a basic compute application here in the region and at the edge. We're backing up all the network settings and all the security posture of the application. And Commvault Cloud is orchestrating all of that. In this case, Commvault's been deployed into the shared services account in the multi-account landing zone. If you don't have a multi-account landing zone, AWS Control Tower can set that up for you. And if you don't have a shared services account today, the AWS Security Reference Architecture covers that account and the kind of the standard OU layout and the standard accounts that you should have to appropriately segregate the different functions in your organization. And we are, of course, protecting to our S3-powered Air Gap Protect. Sorry for anyone that was taking photos there, I was very fast. So we're up to recovery validation here. And this is your first recovery validation. And you'll note it says periodic. This is a continuous process. It's not a one-time test. And so we recommend that you run these as recovery game days, right? Simulated failure events that enable you to bring cross-organizational groups together so you can bring together ops, engineering, security, finance, products, anyone that has a stake in making the organization more resilient to outages, right? The goal here is continuous business, right? These things happen, you just recover and keep moving, right? So you'll be running these recovery game days not just for operational recovery. You might run an incident response game day. You might run a cyber recovery response day that is a very large failure, like a whole data center or a whole region or something like that. But either way, you start off with recovering your Commvault Cloud Control Plane. This is your Commvault Cyber Resilience platform. It knows where all your backups are and how to access them. And Commvault handles this for you. We stand this up in our account so you don't have to worry about it. I mean, who better to recover your Commvault environment than Commvault, right? So we've been doing this for quite a while. And we knew that we need to give you a way to very, very easily recover your applications, but step one of that equation is having your Commvault system up. So Cleanroom will stand that up. It's a temporary instance, of course, and then you can run your clean recovery into your isolated Cleanroom. This is an AWS account that you provide with all of the security controls relevant to your business, your industry, and the data classification of your apps. You are classifying all of your data, right? And understanding what has sensitive data and what doesn't, because that will dictate where you recover these workloads. You will most definitely have multiple clean rooms to make sure that you keep your data segregated based on its sensitivity and the impact if it was lost. So you will then run your recovery validation. It's going to run an ordered recovery of the resources in your application. And then when the restore is complete, it's going to run any automated runbooks that you've provided to us. So again, removing manual process out of the recovery to reduce that mean time to recovery. So now, as I've said, I think multiple times, because I love it, this is what I love about it, everything is torn down automatically for you after the event. You can configure the time that, like the time if you want it to be shorter or if you want it to be longer. But I love that because if we don't make things affordable, then people won't do it. Like my DR testing, right? It wasn't affordable. I could only do a very small amount, and that put the business at risk. So our second recovery type is a forensic recovery. It's very much the same as the normal operational recovery, but in this case, you're recovering to the security tools account. Now, this is a dedicated account for your security team only. It's set up in your multi-account landing zone again, so you can read about it in the security reference architecture. But it's unique in that it's going to have a lot more controls around it because you're recovering suspected tampered workloads, you're recovering malware. You could just be recovering a failed change. You don't know until you've done a careful inspection of the logs and the anomalies that Commvault identified to determine what went wrong in that environment. And what's so valuable about the forensic recovery is it allows your production application to be brought up in parallel while the investigation goes on. And then you can identify remediation in this safe, clean space away from production and then roll it into production. Now, depending on the severity of the event, you may not want to bring up the production app, but I'm assuming you're not opening your apps up to the world and that was the issue, right? So yes, forensic is exactly the same as the other recovery. It's going to tear down the resources when it's done. So let's step through, it's a bit hard seeing it on slideware. So we're gonna step through a recovery here. This environment's only had 72% success, so there's definitely more testing required here. So we're going to start off by restoring the Commvault control plane. And once that's ready, it's gonna pass us temporary credentials and we'll log in. This will look just like your production Commvault system, only it's not. It's for recovery testing only, right? Because it's gonna get torn down after the testing. So once our system's up, we're now logged in and we can start configuring our application to test. Now in this case, we're going to add a forensic application recovery in US East 1. And we're gonna choose our AZ and our region and a very restrictive security group to make sure that people can't get into this app and this app can't get out. Our security event occurred on October 29th here, so we're gonna roll back to October 29th. And this is a very simple two-tier app. It's got a database and an application. They're going to be restored in order. That's what Cleanroom does for us. And I can see there's actually there's an automated runbook there that the application owner would have given us that validates the app is functioning after restore. So it's restored. Now we can head on over into the console and we can see that both of those compute instances are up in US East 1 as we configured, and we can go and access the app now and start our investigation. Okay, more investigation required. This application has obviously been infected. Fortunately, we've recovered that to the security tools account, right? So we have so many controls around it that this thing won't be roaming through the organization or into our other adjacent production apps. So that was an absolute speed demo for Cleanroom. And it's great, but not all recoveries are going to consist of just EC2 instances. We know as we modernize our applications, we might move from compute to containers to Lambda functions. We know that there are a lot of dynamic resources that help our applications work in the cloud environment, right, where everything fails all the time. For those of you that watch the keynote, it's everything that fails all the time. So plan for them to fail, and if you plan for that, then things won't fail. That's what we're doing in all of this testing, but specifically in this outcome. So in those dynamic applications that are composed of many more services, you need a lot more understanding of the application and its dependencies and its metadata and state to adequately to keep that low mean time to recovery. So I'm happy to announce that Cloud Rewind is now part of the Commvault Cloud family, and Cloud Rewind was formerly known as Apronix. This was a recent acquisition by Commvault, and we made this acquisition because we understood and we saw a shift in the industry of our customers looking to protect the new wave of modern applications. Now, some of you may have started here, but the reality was that we're really starting to see that rapid uptick as businesses are taking a cloud-first approach. And the current methods of protection weren't capturing everything they needed to recover quickly. So Cloud Rewind is unique in the industry in that it continually discovers and detects both your data and all of the dependencies or the dependent resources for your application and all of their associated configuration or metadata, and protects that, obviously. And the goal here is to allow you to rebuild those applications new should you need to recover the entire application, or should you need to move it to a new location, or even test recovery in another account or region. And that sounds simple, but for these applications, because they're distributed amongst so many services, that can be very, very challenging and require a number of teams to coordinate: network, security, and so on. So our goal here is exactly the same. We're looking to reduce the mean time to recover, but for, I'm going to say, complex multi-service applications. And the reason I pause is in the keynote today, they were talking about complexity is not the number of components, right? And there was a really great example of unicycles and tricycles and bicycles, and that bicycles were the best answer, but they did have inherent complexity where needed, right, to make them more functional. Now, the challenge here is yes, that's true, but when you're recovering all of those resources, it does get a little bit complex. Now, fortunately with Cloud Rewind, we've made that easier for you. And Cloud Rewind's secret sauce here is infrastructure as code. So what it's going to do is discover those resources, protect them, protect all their metadata and state so that it can be rebuilt, and it gets rebuilt using CloudFormation. Even if you didn't roll out your applications with CloudFormation, Cloud Rewind is going to go and generate and synthesize CloudFormation template for you to recover. And then that's going to give you the ability to roll out that entire application again to perform resilience testing or that periodic recovery testing that we've been talking about, but for a much larger application. So why was this a problem? Well, for that, we need to kind of look back, right? For those of you that have been protecting applications for a while, you'll know that not only do you need to understand the dependencies inside your app, which let's call that the easy part of the problem, you need to discover and understand all of the external dependencies and potentially the order that you need to bring those up. And this work never ends. And it never ends because we never write it down in the same place. It's in text files, config files, Excel spreadsheets, email, just tribal knowledge within the organization, or you may not know. And when I was in big telco in Australia, we were continually assessing and reassessing the dependencies for our applications so that we knew whether we could recover those applications in a serious event. With the average organization having like 300 plus applications, this is a lot of work. I'm fairly sure we had more than 300 at the telco. So we've been using all these terms today about composable applications and dynamic applications. You start this problem with monolithic infrastructure, right? Should be easy, right? Everything's on one server, or maybe it's a 3-tier app, you've got a web app database. Fairly easy to understand. Well, the challenge is as you start modernizing and switching out components of that monolithic application and switching them out with one or many Amazon services or microservices you develop yourself, that config map, that dependency map for your application becomes very, very large very, very quickly. And in fact, because of that constant evolution that they were talking about in the keynote today, this is going to be continually changing for you. And that is exactly why Cloud Rewind is required, and that's the problem it was designed to solve. And so let's take a look at a very basic application, because going to the nth degree is not going to help. So we've got clients accessing a resilient multi-AZ web app here. They're directed to the local instance of the app by Route 53. They're then directed into healthy resources by a load balancer. And those resources happen to be a set of EC2 instances that are encapsulated by an auto-scaling group so that this app can respond to unanticipated load or demand. And there's some persistent data being written out to databases and S3. There's also some security posture, so we know who can talk to what on what ports and protocols. Now, the traditional way of protecting an application like this, those are the resources that would be protected and recovered in a failure event. All the stuff that is no longer on the screen, the assumption by the platform owner is that the application owner or developer knows where all of that stuff is and can rebuild it on demand during a failure event. This is never a scenario for success because quite often they don't know, or the last time they wrote it down was 3 months ago, or the person that originally built it is no longer with the organization. And so what you have happen there is what I call a some assembly required event. So they throw those partially restored components over to the application owner and literally ask them to rebuild the application during a failure event. This is not fun. I've been part of this at the big telco, and we would have what was called war rooms, and there would be 60 people on a conference bridge. There would be internal employees. There'd be at least 3 external companies that had responsibility, and everyone's arguing and over order of recovery and what's coming next and who's signing off which step. All of this is adding delay to getting the application back into the hands of your customer or your users. And so a new approach was needed. And so Cloud Rewind, as I've said, is basically continuously discovering and detecting the persistent data and all of the metadata for your distributed or composable applications, codifying that in CloudFormation. And then it allows you to do what we affectionately call a recovery as code. Now, I love this specifically because it hooks into your organizational controls. And if anyone's ever tried to get an application through acceptance to operate in an organization, a lot of those checks are about making sure that you gel with the existing governance frameworks within the business, that they know that they can observe and control what you're doing. And if you're using something like AWS CloudFormation hooks, you can be notified, or you can specifically stop the deployment of resources via CloudFormation that breach your operational security or cost controls. That's huge. That means as your business evolves and puts new controls in place, they will automatically be applied to the restores that Cloud Rewind is doing. So your governance team will love you, your security team will love you, your GRC team will love you. So, and there's one final thing, which is almost like it's definitely a close second, and that's the ability for the developers to work backwards. So if you're in a state where you're not currently using CloudFormation, or you're not using it consistently across your app, that's something that you can iterate on and improve with Cloud Rewind. Don't wait for the failure event. You can get the CloudFormation out of Cloud Rewind and start integrating infrastructure as code into your pipelines. So yeah, really accelerate that recovery process. Okay, so that's it for me. I'm going to hand off for Mike for the last best practice.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. So who went to the keynote Monday night? Oh, that's not going to make sense. So Monday night's focus, if I had to boil it down to one word, Matt, what word would it be? It starts with an S.
Starts with an S.
That's right. All right, it's all about scale.
Scale.
It was all about scale.
Yes.
It was talking about aggregating ultra clusters. It was trying to figure out how to make sure they could get all the cables attached to all these machines so that they could work as fast as humanly possible. So scale, again, being at the company for a really long time, thinking about traditional backup and recovery, it just doesn't work for scale. And we know we had to do something different, and that's where event-driven is really going to come in. And another thing that I think everyone can recognize throughout most of this chat is, cost is always another undertone that has to be considered, because you really can't do things at all costs. So when we think about scale, you get all of these other additional challenges. We're constantly trying to do things faster. There's speeds and feeds, there's RTOs and RPOs, and there's all kinds of new threat vectors that are absolutely causing all kinds of different destruction. You got a mixture of teams that you need to implement, DevOps and CloudOps and FinOps. Otherwise, people are doing things manually, and there's all kinds of mistakes. And then, as Matt was mentioning before, there's all this regulation, right? There's DORA and all the traditional ones that we're all familiar with. So, as we're doing all of this and we're just trying to get our work done, we have to think about all these other pillars. And then, of course, cost is at the bottom, because it does span all of these things. We have to think about how we're spending money most effectively so that we could do things like frequent testing and whatnot. So, again, these challenges become, exponential when we're talking about scaling. So that's where event-driven really comes into play. And, we have just a traditional AWS customer. They have a whole bunch of workloads. And, this is a customer kind of looking at the Clumio architecture. And I've oversimplified it so that hopefully you're disappointed and you go directly to the Clumio booth and get all the nitty-gritty details, because there's event bridges and there's Lambda functions and then there's all these other things. But at the end of the day, we're using CloudFormation or Terraform to create a completely segmented environment in the Clumio Secure Vault. And as data protection and resiliency tasks are happening, it's spinning up Lambda functions, it's doing the work, and it's spinning them down. So as events start to occur, we spin things up. If we need a lot of them, we spin a lot of things up. And then as tasks are done, we spin them all down. So it becomes very cost effective for us to do that. So a very big paradigm shift from traditional Commvault Cloud, and this is the evolution of how the platform is going to function in the future. So as I said before, this was our Clumio acquisition. So this was our second acquisition for the year. And again, it provides, autonomous backup and rapid recovery, specifically, for us in S3 and DynamoDB. So hopefully you caught Woon's session yesterday where he launched Backtrack. So that's our easy way for us to kind of roll back the transactions that are happening in S3. So really cool technology, and hopefully you can catch the replay. The other cool thing about Clumio is it's the way the architecture scans through all of the accounts and the regions. It provides us with like this gap analysis. So similar to what I was talking about with Sony, where we have this single pane of glass, Clumio also gives us that really high-level satellite view of all of these components that live in AWS so that we can protect them, and hopefully we don't need to recover them, but when time comes, we can do that as efficient and we can do it at scale. And then I know we've been harping on a lot of the compliance things and the standards, but again, throughout whatever portfolio pieces you use, like these are these red threads. So, making sure that there's continuous monitoring, making sure that we're optimizing where we're putting the data, it continually be top of mind. So, really cool stuff with Clumio, and if you guys want to try it out, you can go into AWS Marketplace and you can go and get a trial. So some quick takeaways, because I know we're blasting through a lot of this content. Confirm that you're always protecting all of your data. That can't easily be created, so that's kind of like a caveat, but when in doubt, protect everything. But you could use these tools, some of the tools that we talked about today, to really understand what your data footprint looks like, and maybe there's some stuff that you don't need to protect, and you could remove that from some of your protection schemes. Establish an air gap for your application data and metadata, keeping that separation there, so you can absolutely minimize blast radius. Test. So again, I can't stress this enough. Everyone should be testing as frequent as possible and utilize these capabilities to do it very cost effectively and be ready for when disaster strikes. Adopt a rebuild on demand approach. So that's the cloud rewind. So even if you don't have anything on the other side, you could still use cloud rewind to start to rebuild your modern applications somewhere else. And then as your data grows and your RPOs shrink, start to consider capabilities like event-driven architectures and protection so that you can get those elements of scale accordingly. So some additional resources, we put the hyperlinks and the QR codes, but again, just like Clumio, you can go in AWS Marketplace, you can go grab Commvault Cloud there too. So feel free to go there. You could also grab it from our main website. And we'll wrap it up. We'll stay for the duration of, if there's any questions, feel free to give us a holler. We'll hang out for a little bit, and appreciate your time today. Thanks.